We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Hey guys! This is Urizi and I'm back with part 9 of What If Naruto Was a Simple Teenage Shop Owner. Things aren't always as simple as they seem. Just because he found himself in a new world, Naruto shouldn't have forgotten this. Now he must deal with fallen angels, devils, perverts and God, all while maintaining a relationship and running his store. Things can never be simple for him. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 31. Naruto was never really much of an early riser. His training had demanded him to be one, but even years of conditioning couldn't get rid of his hate for the early hours of the day. The erratic chirping of the birds and the seemingly burning intensity of the sun made him ponder why exactly anyone deemed it a good idea to actually wake up early. Even when he went out on his purification runs, he would have to go through a large amount of mental prep and coaxing just to get out of bed. That was why Naruto had groaned as a knock echoed through his home. He felt something shift beneath his arm, causing him to smile as his mind momentarily left the knock at his front door. Almost instinctively, his arms tightened around the object as he brought it closer to his chest. The object reciprocated the hold as it snuggled deep into his body. The endearing moment came to a close as another knock, this one much louder, reached their ears. This time, both occupants of the bed let loose groans as they reluctantly opened their eyes. "They won't leave unless you answer." Kaniko's voice came out in a sleepy haze as she hid her head from the sun beneath the covers and Naruto's chest. The blonde sighed, knowing that his girlfriend was correct, before summoning a clone at their bedside. The clone immediately headed out the room, assumingly to go answer the door. "There!" Naruto huffed out before wrapping his free arm around Kaniko. The smile on the Nekasha's face made it quite clear she enjoyed the contact. The aura of warmth and comfort Naruto usually radiated seemed to increase tenfold whenever she was in bed with him. Their proximity in bed left her almost drowning in it, filling her with a sense of satisfaction that no one or nothing else could bring. Naruto couldn't help but wonder to himself just how he ended up in such an amazing situation as Kaniko unconsciously purred beneath his touch. As her chest rose and fell beneath him, he smiled. Just the sound and feel of her breathing had elicited such a positive response from him. He couldn't imagine anything that could ruin the moment. Boss, and just like that, he had been proved wrong yet again. Naruto brought his head up and aimed a glare that screamed, "Why the hell are you bothering me?" at the innocent clone. The copy rolled his eyes at his creator's pissy attitude as he leaned casually against the doorway. "Michael called a meeting among the factions. He said it's absolutely important that you attend." The clone watched as his creator flopped his head back down onto the bed with a loud sigh. After smirking at the overblown reaction, it disappeared in a puff of smoke, leaving the two lovers alone once more. "Should I go?" Naruto questioned out loud. If the blonde was being honest with himself, he was really just looking for an excuse not to attend the meeting. A no from Kaniko would have been good enough for him. Yes. Could be important. Naruto sighed again at her answer. That hadn't been the answer he was hoping for. He would have been content with staying in bed, holding Kaniko like she was an oversized teddy bear while they both slept. But instead, he now had to get dressed and go meet with a bunch of old guys. "But, before you go." Naruto was momentarily brought out of his depressed mood when he felt Kaniko shift herself so her ass was directly over his lap. The thin pair of boxers that hid his private parts from the world did little to halt the sensation of the Nekasha rubbing her scantily clad ass against his crotch. Against his will, but no against his wanting, his lower body responded in turn as he met eyes with her. The small smirk on her face made her intentions very clear as Naruto felt her slowly begin to guide his hands down her body. "Let's make them wait a little. Took you long enough," Azazel commented as Naruto sauntered into the room. The blonde looked like he had quite literally just climbed out of bed. His hair was even more wild than usual, his clothes were wrinkled and the yawn he had released at the fallen angel's words managed to fill the entire room with its sound. "If someone had actually told me where to go, I would have gotten here quicker," Naruto said while aiming a pointed look at Michael. The angel looked like Naruto's complete opposite as his immaculate form sat behind Ria's personal desk. You would have learned that we were having the meeting in the Devil's Club room if you hadn't slammed the door in the face of one of my angels. Now, please take a seat. The angel stated calmly while gesturing towards the couch. Naruto waved away the man's words before trudging his way over to the couch. He flopped onto the piece of furniture, earning him a chuckle from Xerxes, who was also sat on the couch. Now, I have called this meeting because there have been several developments that concern me, especially with the infancy of our treaty. The angel spoke, bringing all of their attentions on to him. Even Naruto sat up at the sound of his voice. He had a few ideas of just what exactly could have been bothering the angel. Naruto, the focus of attention in the room shifted onto the blonde when Michael called out his name. Naruto, his eyes already filled with annoyance and tiredness, returned all of their looks before settling his attention on Michael. Is it true that the infinite dragon god has eye? Ophis. Naruto spoke, interrupted the seraph. By his side, Azazel and Xerxes had to hold back smirks as Michael sent the teen a perplexed look. Excuse me? Michael questioned. Naruto huffed at his response before finally sitting all the way up in his seat. Her name is Ophis. If you're going to talk to her, you should at least use her name. You wouldn't like it if I called you the pretty boy with the white wings, would you? Michael could only blink at Naruto's words before briefly looking over to his fellow supernatural leaders to see their reaction. When he saw the two men shrug at him, the seraph knew he was on his own as he returned his attention back to Naruto with an almost silent sigh. I apologize. By your reaction, is it safe to assume that the rumors that Ophis has had a significant portion of her power stolen are correct? Naruto nodded in response to Michael's question. I assume that she has been staying with you and is well protected. Naruto nodded again. Michael hummed at the blonde's answers. I trust that she will be safe under your protection. For now, we must focus on finding the culprit behind the robbery. Even a portion of the dragon's power can spell disaster for the world. Azazel and Xerxes nodded along to the angel's words. They had been sent into a panic when they had been told about the assault on Ophis. They knew that even a portion of the dragon's power wielded correctly could destroy several legions worth of their people. I think I know who did it. Naruto once again drew the attention back onto himself as he spoke. The three leaders looked honestly shocked at his words as they stared at him. You do? Naruto nodded in response. Yeah. A god named Hades attacked my shop a day ago. I also think he was the culprit behind the thing that happened at the school. Naruto said while directing a look at Xerxes. Hades? The Greek god of Underworld? The devil asked almost frantically. I thought he was the god of death, but I think we're talking about the same guy. It was Xerxes' turn to flop down in his seat. The man looked distressed as his body seemed to melt further and further down into the couch, drawing looks of concern from the other occupants of the room. Is something the matter? Michael asked. Xerxes hesitantly looked up at the angel before letting out an irritated huff. Yeah, if we're talking about the same Hades, then we're going to have a bit of a problem. When the devil received nothing but questioning looks from the others, he decided it would be best if he explained a bit more. Hades is the god of the underworld for the Greeks. Even though he is part of the Greek pantheon, he has become powerful enough that his influence has leaked outside of the Greeks. Us devils live in the underworld, so I have had a bit of interaction with the man, and he is a monster. Xerxes paused as a brief shiver ran up his spine. The devil looked disturbed as he recalled memories of his time with Hades. There is a reason why the underworld is commonly called Hades. His power makes him famous outside his own faction. The man stinks of death. His presence brought the underworld to a halt when he let it loose. Seraphal managed to freeze a good chunk of the underworld with her ice magic. Hades froze the entirety of our home with just his raw power. Why would this god want anything to do with us? We have done nothing to earn the ire of the Greek pantheon. Michael interrupted the devil with a small frown on his face. The angel would be lying if he said he wasn't at least a little bothered by Xerxes' words of the god's power. We earned it just by existing. Hades hates anything that isn't Greek. Naruto chimed in. Xerxes nodded along to his words. During my brief interactions with him, I've assumed the same thing. When he had learned that we were part of the Christian pantheon, he demanded we leave his domain. He said that the underworld was only worthy of the Greeks. It took Seraphal, Graphia, and I just to get him to leave. Our treaty was probably the last straw for him. He sees us as a threat and plans on using Ophis power to destroy us. Azazel said. At the fallen angel's words, Michael sighed while slumping down into his seat. An attack seems almost inevitable. We must prepare, Michael stated. In the back of his mind, Naruto groaned to himself. By the blonde's tone, he knew that this discussion was nowhere close to being complete. He was in for a long morning. I should have just stayed in bed. The Uzumaki residence wasn't the most pleasant of environments at the moment. The awkwardness, centered in the home's kitchen, radiated through the house, creating a suffocating atmosphere. Does anyone want more? A clone of Naruto asked and got 3 raised hands in response. The blonde shook his head and made a mental reminder to himself, technically his creator, to buy more eggs as he went to the fridge to retrieve some. After the blonde's question, the dining room descended into silence as the 3 girls sat at the table awaited their food. Ophis sat at the head of table and seemed content with staring off into the distance. Kaneko sat to her right and she seemed content with poking at the remnants of sausage and eggs that had been on her plate. Directly across from her sat her sister, who seemed to be the main source of the awkwardness as she nervously looked in between the 2 girls. Why were you so loud? Ophis was the one to break the silence as she shifted her attention onto Kaneko. Kuroka found herself blushing as she realized just what exactly the dragon had been talking about. She had woken up to the sound of her little sister enthusiastically calling out her boyfriend's name. It hadn't been the least pleasant awakening she had experienced. I was having sex. Kaneko didn't bother dumbing it down for the dragon as she responded. The Nekashu glanced up from her plate and saw that Ophis was now staring at her with a curious gleam in her eyes. Sex? The dragon questioned. Her eyes were glued on Kaneko, who had returned to poking at the crumbs on her plate. It's something I do with Naruto. I'm loud because he's making me feel good. Kaneko flippantly responded. Can I do it with him? Kuroka nearly choked on air at Ophis' question. Kaneko merely glanced up briefly from her plate to stare at the dragon before lowering her gaze. No. Ophis' neutral expression broke as a frown found its way to her features. It was clear that the casual denial of her request had irked the dragon somewhat. Why not? Because you can't. Kaneko didn't even bother looking up from her plate to respond this time. Kuroka watched as the frown on Ophis' face deepened at her sister's response. She began to subtly scoot her seat away from the table while she prepared to run, just in case. Why can I not? The dragon's agitation was clear as she directed a glare at her devil counterpart. Like before, Kaneko didn't look even slightly bothered by the Ophis anger as she kept her attention down on the table. Because only his girlfriend can. Ophis' agitation seemed to shatter at Kaneko's words. The anger was replaced with curiosity as she settled back down into her seat. Kuroka watched as the dragon returned to staring off into the distance, this time with a pondering look on her face. I have some eggs for everyone. Naruto's clone made his presence known as he came walking into the kitchen with a large pan in his hand. Kaneko finally looked up and flashed Naruto a small smile as he scraped some eggs on her plate. Ophis was unresponsive as Naruto did the same with her while Kuroka offered up the teen a small smile of thanks while keeping her attention on Kaneko and Ophis. Does anyone want anything else? Silence was his response, prompting the blonde to shrug and return to the kitchen. He had plates to wash. If the clone knew the conversation he had missed by mere seconds, he would have immediately dispelled to warn his boss. Instead, he remained ignorant, and unknowingly opened the pathway for a whole new wave of headaches to assault his creator. If only. Naruto let loose a loud yawn as he walked down the sidewalk. The gesture brought him several irritated looks from the people around him. The blonde didn't seem to care much as he continued making his way down the streets of Kuo. It was midday and the shinobi had only just managed to escape from the meeting between the 3 faction leaders. His head was swimming with the load of plans, logistics, and countermeasure that had been discussed during the meeting. He had exactly 0 plans on using any of them. It had taken everything in him not to fall asleep during it. He didn't want to deal with an agitated Michael, after all. At least it's Sunday. Sundays usually aren't that busy. Naruto thought to himself. The meeting had made him miss out on the early morning rush for his shop. He was hoping he would be able to make it up by staying open a little late today. The blonde turned the corner onto the street his shop was located. He had expected a few irate customers hungering for their midday snack at his doors. Some of his customers were very routine, and if they didn't get their fix, they would get angry. Naruto found himself looking at something very different. The front of his store was littered. It was littered with graffiti or trash or anything like that. No, Instead, it was covered in an array of flowers, wreaths, candles, and other offerings. What the? Naruto jogged the rest of the way to his shop. As he got close, he had to be careful not to step on any of the multitude of stuff in front of his shoe. When he reached the door, he noticed that the structure was covered in a sea of handwritten notes. He reached out and plucked one of the notes off his door in order to read it. "Thank you, Candy-sama. Your treats have kept my children happy and your presence has kept my plants healthy." Naruto read out loud. The teen's face screamed confusion as he dropped the note and reached out to grab another one. "Candy-sama, the chirping of the birds has returned to my garden. Thank you. You have blessed my taste buds once more. Thank you. I can finally take my dog on a walk again. Thank you. Your candy helped me get my boyfriend in the MO." Naruto stopped there once he realized just where the note was heading. He let it fall from his hand as he stared back up at his note-covered door. This day was not going anywhere near how we predicted. The faction meeting along with this sea of messages and offerings were completely unexpected. Any hope for a normal day had been dashed by their presence. Wordlessly, two clones formed next to Naruto, startling the passing pedestrians. The blonde didn't bother to hide their presence as he turned to them with a tired expression on his face. "Clean this all up and bring it to the back room." Naruto ordered his clones before pushing his way into the store. The clones shared a look between themselves before getting to work. They had a lot of work to get done. "Thank you, Candy-sama." Naruto held back a sigh as yet another customer called him by that name. His morning had been spent attempting to correct them, but all of his efforts were met with failure. His customers seemed intent on calling him that and nothing he could say would change their mind. "Candy-sama. Candy-sama." Naruto was brought out of his inner brooding as the doors to his shop slammed open. In came sprinting two people, one significantly older female looking while the other was a young boy who seemed to be clutching something to his chest. The blonde became a lot more alert as the duo ran their way to his counter. He faintly noticed a trail of blood dripping its way after the duo. "My dog, a car, she." The young boy was frantic as he spoke. The words tried to leave his mouth but got jumbled up on their way out. The older girl took notice of this and decided to take over. "His dog got hit by a car outside. It isn't breathing and we need your help, Candy-sama. Please help him." Naruto glanced down at the boy's arms and noticed that he was indeed holding on to a dog. The creature looked to be in bad condition as its chest rose and fell with a haggard squeak. A solid stream of blood dripped from its mouth while its tongue hung limply out of his mouth. Naruto hesitated as he looked at the young boy's face. He was desperate and it was very noticeable. The dog was probably the child's most beloved friend and it was currently dying in his hands. The grief and panic the boy was going through were probably heartbreaking. "Put her on the counter." As the words left his mouth, the blonde knew he would regret it. Yet, his conscience wouldn't allow him to let a boy's dog die just because he didn't want to show off his abilities, especially when half the town already thought he was a god. The girl lifted the dog from the boy's arms while Naruto cleared it off. Once it was clear, she set the creature down and stepped backward. With the dog on his counter, Naruto set to work. By this point, the entirety of the shop had focused their attention on the scene. They watched with held breaths as the blonde rolled up his sleeves. Some managed to catch a brief glimpse of a sun imprinted on the teen's palm. Any attempt at trying to see the image any further was blocked when Naruto placed the palm of his hand against the dog's chest. At first, nothing happened. The dog's breath continued to come into it with shaky, haggard breaths while blood still dripped from its mouth. The look on the boy's face fell even more as he began to think his pet was done for. Not even a god was able to save it. Suddenly, a bright golden light flashed from the dog's chest. The light sent the shop in awe as they stared at the scene. If one looked closely, they would have noticed the golden glow was actually coming from Naruto's palm. The teen's eyes remained close as he kept his hand on the dog. The melancholy look on the young boy's face began to break apart when he noticed the dog's breathing steadily become better. The rise and fall of its chest began to pick up speed. The wheeze that was once leaving its mouth actually started to sound like breathing again. The thick trail of blood leaving its mouth turned into a faint line before disappearing altogether. After a full minute of silence and anticipation, Naruto opened his eyes while taking his hands away from the dog. To the crowd's amazement, the creature proceeded to crawl up to its feet before letting out a hearty bark that filled the store with its sound. "You're due." Naruto found himself interrupted as his shop erupted into loud cheers. The blonde didn't have a chance to say anything else as waves of praise and congratulations washed over him. He could only watch as the young boy tearfully picked the dog off the counter. The dog responded well to its owner's presence as it began to lick at its face, wiping away some of the boy's tears while unknowingly causing more. "Thank you, Candy-sama. You have blessed us once more. Thank you so much," the girl said with a bow. Her own eyes were filled with tears as she turned to hug her brother along with his dog. Naruto watched the scene with no small amount of happiness in his eyes as the store around him continued to sing his praises. Being a god doesn't seem so terrible now, right? Kurama's voice brought the blonde's attention away from the store of cheering people. "I don't think I would do a good job at being a god." Naruto found himself even as he flashed a nervous smile at the row of people who had just bowed at him. He could hear Kurama's chuckle shortly after his statement, making it very clear that the tailed beast didn't take the boy very seriously. "After your display today, I don't think you'll have much of a choice. Be ready, brat. Things are only going to get more interesting from now on." No matter how much he wanted to refute his partner's words, Naruto knew Kurama was right. The crowd of cheering people made that very clear to him. In everyone else's eyes, he was a god, whether he liked it or not. Her uncle's domain was one of the few among the Greek gods that she actually enjoyed visiting. She could feel the breath of the wild running through it with every step she took. Creatures, some that hadn't nor would ever be discovered by humanity, swam wild in their habitats. It warmed her heart as the goddess of wild animals to see that not every creature had to face subjugation and capture. Artemis gave a slight tilt of her head at a group of passing mere people. The various pieces of golden armor covering their body remained untouched by the effects of rust. Instead, it shined underneath the soft shine of bottled bioluminescent plankton that helped light the hallway. "Master Poseidon is awaiting your presence." As Artemis approached the massive doors of Poseidon's throne room, one of its guards spoke out. "Thank you, Triton." Artemis nodded at the merman. Out of all the people she had observed, Triton was the most outstanding of the bunch. His upper half was that of a human. His barrel-chested figure was unclothed. His lower half took the form of a fish tail. A large golden trident sat in the man's hand while a dark pink conch shell sat on his back. The man offered his own nod to the goddess before returning to standing at attention. Artemis gave the merman one last glance over before turning her attention towards the grandiose doors in front of her. The goddess couldn't help but roll her eyes at the close-up sight of the gold-trimmed wood. If there was one thing she disliked about this particular uncle, it was his love for the lavish and his perverted nature. Two things she found very hard to overcome. Better than the alternative. The goddess thought to herself as the doors opened before her. She didn't bother waiting as she walked immediately through the small gap. Triton seemed aware of the goddess' hurry as he motioned for the doors to close. They shut a moment afterward, trapping the goddess inside. "Artemis!" A booming voice reached the goddess' ears the moment the doors shut behind her. The voice managed to shake the crystal chandeliers that hung from the roof. It reverberated off the aquamarine walls that held dozens of pictures and weapons. Artemis even managed to feel it through the glass floors that extended through the entirety of the room. "Why must you be so loud, uncle?" Artemis sighed out as she approached the throne. The lavish golden chair sat in the middle of the room was occupied by a man. This man was massive, easily towering over the goddess multiple times over. Large red robes provided him with some modest. A massive trident, similar to Triton's but much larger in size, leaned against his throne. The god's cerulean eyes stared down at Artemis while a large grin sat on his face. "For the same reason you deem it wise to walk around in such a miniature form." Poseidon shot back while still maintaining his grin. "My ego isn't as massive as yours, so I do not require a physical form to match it." Poseidon erupted into laughter at the goddess' insult. His laughter managed to shake the room once more, causing Artemis to roll her eyes. Instead of continuing, she remained silent and waited for the man's laughter to die away. She knew that if she didn't have her uncle's full attention, nothing she said would be picked up by the man. "I see that you still have that bite to your words. I love it. I've come with news concerning the new nature god." That manages to stop the god's laughter right in its track. His smile disappeared from his face as he leaned forward on his chair. "Please continue." Inwardly, Artemis smiled. This was why she found her uncle so easy to deal with. Despite his oddities and annoyances, he knew when it was an appropriate time to act like a god. That same interaction played out with her father would have resulted in an argument that would have ultimately ended with her leaving his temple in frustration. He performed a miracle today. Restored the life source of a small animal. Artemis explained. Poseidon raised an eyebrow at her words before leaning back into his throne with a pensive expression on his face. Are you sure that he wasn't tapping into his domain? Nature gods are usually associated with regenerative abilities and properties. Artemis shook her head at the god's words. I've sensed nothing of the sort from him. Actually, I've only seen the opposite. I can sense death on him. Artemis paused here. A frown marred her features as she glanced down at the ground. No, not on him. I can sense it in him. It's like he's been touched by it. It's a part of him. That's the only way I can explain him being able to block Pluto's scythe as easily as he did. Even my brother has been harmed by that weapon. It took him weeks to recover. She remembered that year. Hades had ordered the death of Apollo's son, Asclepios, because the boy had been raising the dead using the blessing his father had bestowed upon him. When Apollo went to confront the god of the underworld, Hades hadn't even bothered to directly confront the heartbroken father. Instead, he sent Pluto. The two fought, and while Apollo had the upper hand in terms of speed, Pluto was a master at what he did. He managed to land a hit with his scythe on the god's midsection. Apollo had been immediately rendered useless. It didn't take much effort for a squad of Grim Reaper to escort him out of Hades, leaving him with a ruined heart, an injured body and a bruised ego. In him, that would mean some of his powers are centered around death. Poseidon paused here. A small grin began to stretch across his face. Candy, nature, and death. What an odd combination. Poseidon let out a hum at this. Despite its oddities, the god was pleased. Because no matter how odd the domains, the more the blonde had, the more powerful he most likely was. He's hiding more. Artemis' voice brought the god out of his thoughts. I can sense it. Every time he taps into nature, I can feel it. Soon, he'll awaken Gaia. She won't be able to resist the pull of such power for much longer. Gaia is not a problem. She can and will be restrained if she decides to wake from her nap. Poseidon responded flippantly. Your part has been completed. You've gathered enough evidence to prove the boy's worth. What now? Artemis asked her uncle. Poseidon let loose a small chuckle before he rose up to his feet. Now with him standing, Artemis looked like an ant to a human. The giant reached for his trident and grabbed the mighty weapon in his hand while looking down at the goddess with a wide grin on his face. Now, we go show him our worth. Naruto let out a sigh of relief as he cracked open the last can of orange soda in the fridge. The blonde didn't seem to care about being quiet, despite the late hours of the day, as he greedily consumed the can's content. After the erratic day that he had been ecstatic to return to a not burned down home. It had only hit him halfway through the day that he had left his home in the care of 3 girls, 2 who were considered estranged sisters only days before, while the other was a dragon god who wished to kill him. He had briefly gone into a mild fit of panic but calmed when he realized the clone he had left with the trio hadn't dispelled himself. That meant that the house had at least been intact. When he got home, he was surprised to find that absolutely nothing in the home was broken. Kaneko and Kuroka were in the living room and happily greeted him. From his clone, he learned that Ophis had retreated to her room earlier in the day and hadn't returned. He had debated peeking inside of her room to check on her but decided against it. Instead, he used some of his sensing abilities to merely confirm her presence in the home. With that confirmed, the blonde had been free to spend the rest of his day in relaxation with the Nekashu duo. He had ended it by returning to bed with Kaneko and promptly falling to sleep with the girl in his arms. But now, thirst called him into action. As he consumed the last drops of orange soda from the can, the blonde let loose a loud burp. The burp resonated off the walls of the kitchen, causing the blonde to chuckle silently to himself. He moved to throw away the can but stopped when he noticed that he was no longer alone. Hey Ophis. Naruto managed to play off his slight shock at her sudden appearance with a smile. However, in the back of his mind, he was wondering to himself just how long the dragon had been standing there. Also, did she hear him burp? Hello. Ophis responded in her usual quiet voice. She said nothing more afterward, plunging the small room into silence. Naruto felt himself grow awkward underneath the dragon's stare. In combination with the silence, the blonde found himself wishing, almost begging for something to fill the void. When the void remained unfilled for close to a full minute, the blonde decided to take matters into his own hands. "So, how was you? Can I be your girlfriend?" "What?" Naruto certainly was not expecting that. Out of all the things the dragon could have said, asking him to be his girlfriend was nowhere near the top of the list. "Can I be your girlfriend?" Ophis repeated the question once again, confirming that the shinobi hadn't misheard her. As panic began to fill him, he gave a quick shake of his head to clear his thoughts. This was not the time to panic. Panicking would bury him in a hole he wouldn't escape from unscathed. "No, you can't. I'm sorry." The blonde tried to be as gentle as possible in his response. He had no idea how the idea found its way into the dragon's mind, but he knew that not handling the situation delicately would end badly for him. "Why not?" The dragon responded with a frown. Once again, she was being denied something she wanted by Naruto. It was starting to become infuriating to her. "Well," the blonde hesitated as he racked his brain for a good answer. "I already have one. Kaneko." Naruto nodded. Ophis' frown deepened at this as she looked down at the ground. Silence overcame the room once more for several seconds before the dragon brought her head back up. "More than one." Even if it wasn't framed as a full question, Naruto got the message. The shock that he was feeling was well concealed as he continued to hold a straight face. "I can't." "Why?" Naruto inwardly screeched. This was not the way he wanted to end his day. He knew he should have checked up on the dragon earlier. This conversation would have been dealt with before he went to bed. Instead, he was standing in the middle of his kitchen in a pair of shorts while attempting to explain to an immortal dragon why she couldn't be his girlfriend. "Look, why are you even asking this?" The blonde attempted to divert the topic, figuring it was his best chance at getting out the conversation. "I want to have sex with you." Naruto's calm facade broke as he choked on the girl's words. Once again, he found himself almost speechless. Let's just talk about this later." The blonde responded in a tired voice. He met Ophis' eyes and froze up when he noticed an unprecedented amount of sadness in her eyes. "I want to feel good." Naruto felt his heart melt at the Ophis words. The sadness in her voice tore at his emotions and made him hesitate once more. Eventually, the more rational part of him won out as he released an almost silent sigh. "I promise we'll talk later," Naruto assured the dragon. When he noticed the frown still present on her face, he reached out and laid a comforting hand on her head. "I don't break my promises, Ophis." The shinobi made sure to look the dragon directly in the eyes as he spoke. The two beings held eye contact for several long moments without a word being exchanged. A single light hanging from the kitchen ceiling illuminated their figures as they stared at one another. "Okay," Ophis mumbled out as the frown slowly faded from her lips. She remained under the blonde's touch for several more seconds before walking out of the kitchen. Naruto watched her leave the room and, several seconds later, listened as her door closed behind her. Where did that even come from? Naruto shook his head clear of his thoughts before beginning to trudge his way back to his room. There was no point in dedicating any more mental effort tonight to what had just happened. His tired brain wasn't ready to fully process it. Why couldn't any night for him just end normally? Chapter 32. Why are you still here? Don't you have a whole group of gods to rule over? Meh, Thor, Tyr, and Freya can handle it. I'm on a vacation. Odin flippantly commented before reaching over the counter in an attempt to snatch one of the freshly made sugary creations that had been tempting his appetite. His attempt ended in pain when Naruto smacked his hand away with a wooden ladle, causing the god to let out a howl of pain as he retracted his hand. Can't you move your vacation somewhere else? My shop isn't really all that scenic. I would say otherwise. Look at all the lovely people who have came here to see the Candy-sama. The man's voice was teasing as he turned his body to gesture at the crowd of people behind him. And, he was right. The store was almost bursting with people. Every single table in the building was filled. Every single seat Naruto had was in use. There were even people just standing around, waiting for a chance to purchase and taste one of his treats. Naruto knew that the bulk of his customers wasn't what the god was focusing on. Odin was all but leering at the females inside the shop. His eyes bounced from table to table, drinking in every inch of cleavage and leg he could find. At one point he began drooling, which was the point that Naruto decided to cut the god's pervertedness short by slapping him in the back of his head. What was that for? Odin sent Naruto an accusatory glare while holding the back of his now throbbing blonde decided to rightfully ignore his outburst in favor of fulfilling yet another order. He passed off the tray of cupcakes to his clones and watched as it dashed across the store with the treats in hand. You know, cute girls aren't the only reason why I stay around here. Oh really? What else is keeping you here? Outwardly, the blonde didn't even pause in his movements as he began to prepare a tray of crescent rolls. Inwardly, he was preparing himself to deny any attempt at getting him join, team up or partner with Odin and his group of gods. I'm working out a sort of agreement with Christian bunch. Soon the Norses will be best of buds with them. This statement caused Naruto to pause briefly in his actions. He glanced up from his rolls and saw that Odin was looking back at him, the man looking as serious as he had ever looked. The look lasted only for a moment before Naruto returned his focus back to his rolls. That's good to hear. Though, if you and me want to get a side agreement going. Odin trailed off, hoping that the blonde would pick up on what he was saying. No. Without even glancing up, Odin got shut down by the blonde. The god attempted a pout, but the attempt at tugging at the blonde's heartstrings ended miserably. A large part of his failure came from the fact that his current form was one of an elderly, perverted man. They didn't make for the cutest of people. You're so mean. Odin pouted. Naruto rolled his eyes at the god's behavior before pointing a finger toward his door. Get out if you think I'm so mean. You wouldn't kick little old me out, would you? Without any warning, two clones appeared on either side of the stool that Odin was sat on. Before the god could even make a peep, the clones reached over and grabbed a hold of his arms. The man seemed to be powerless as the identical duo lifted him from his chair and began to drag him toward the door. Hey! What are you doing? Let go of me! Odin yelled while attempting to wrench his arms out of the clone's grip. The god was surprised to find that no matter how much of his strength he attempted to exert, the clones would not relent. He truly was powerless as the clones kicked the doors open, lifted him up into the air before pushing him out toward the street. He landed first on the concrete and watched as the doors to Naruto's shop closed behind him. He shot back up to his feet and ran back up to the door, intent on gaining entry once more. Instead of the door slamming open like he had expected, the god found himself back on his ass once he rebounded off the still closed doors. It was like he had run into a steel wall. Those seals were some of my best ideas. The blonde thought to himself as his eyes traced the glowing symbols etched into the door frame. They were currently serving as an extra line of defense against pesky supernatural beings like Odin. They would keep the god out for now, at least until one of his customers wanted to leave the shop. I'll deal with that when it comes. It was raining. To most people, the rain would dissuade them from leaving the house. After all, what was better than sleeping late on a rainy morning? Naruto wasn't in that type of mood today. The fact that the boy was sat in the middle of a forest clearing, miles away from his shop and Kuo made that very clear. The soft drizzle that fell from the sky and rebounded through the forest did little to halt the blonde's concentration as he sat in his meditative pose. Child! A single eye slowly creaked open as a raspy voice echoed through the clearing. Naruto's open eye shifted back and forth in search for a source the voice. When he found no such thing, he inwardly sighed to himself before closing his eye. Why today? It was such a nice morning too. Naruto thought to himself while attempting to return to his meditation. There was no doubt in his mind that the voice belonged to some god who he had either somehow managed to anger or gain their interest. The experiences he had in the past several months dictated that he always be aware of this possibility. After a full 5 minutes of silence, Naruto was beginning to think that maybe he actually had been imagining things. His senses slowly began to return to nature as his connection with it was re-established. A deep and steady breath left his lungs as a rush of nature chakra rushed into his body. The hair on his body stood up on its end at the sudden surge of energy before his body started the process of purification. In battle, he would usually expedite the process out of necessity. Now though, when he was alone and away from any pressing matters, he was happy to take his time. Child, I am not your child. Stop calling me that. Naruto grumbled in return as he allowed both of his eyes to open. His bar-shaped pupils gave away that he was in his sage mode as he attempted to spread his senses far enough to glean just who he was talking to and where exactly they were. Surprisingly, he wasn't able to even catch a whiff of this person's presence. Even when the voice gave off a deceptively feminine giggle, he couldn't locate the person. It is true, Naruto tensed up at the sound of the voice. It was much closer this time. It was almost as if the person was speaking right over his shoulder, yet he couldn't sense a single thing from then. You are not my child, yet your connection with me is stronger than any of my children. You even visit more often. The woman, at least Naruto was assuming she was a woman, finished off with a chuckle which flowed into wistful sigh. To the blonde, her tone reminded him of a mother whose children didn't visit her enough. Who are you? Naruto's question was answered by another round of laughter from the woman, causing the blonde to sigh. The giggling wasn't getting him very far in terms of answers. You know me more than anyone, child. Not even from my own womb, yet you're so close. It's invigorating. The blonde almost leapt off the ground when the world around him seemed to shake in tandem with the woman's last word. At this point, he was on high alert as he strained every single one of his senses. If he could just get a sense of where she was. Beneath you. Naruto's head shot down when he heard the voice come from below him. This time, his feet actually did leave the ground when he saw that the voice was coming from directly under him. A noticeably female face looked to have somehow melded into the very earth itself and was now speaking with him. What the hell? Naruto couldn't help but say out loud as he landed several feet away. His comment earned another round of laughter from the woman. Just like when she spoke, her laugh seemed to have a physical effect on the earth as the blonde felt the ground shift along with her. Don't be so frightened. You gave me this beauty. Naruto watched in mixture of shock, interest, and disgust as the face began to push against the earth. The ground seemed to become rubber as it stretched to accommodate the rising face. When the face rose almost 5 feet into the air, the stretched earth beneath it folded in on itself. From the crumpled pile, a body began to take shape. To Naruto, the process encapsulated his whole attention. Dirt, grass, and rock morphed into tanned flesh. Jagged edges turned into feminine curves. Modesty didn't seem to be very important to the creature as no clothes formed. Eventually, the transformation process seemed to finish, leaving Naruto with a very interesting sight. The woman's skin was extremely tan, nearly looking like the color of bronze. For a female, she stood a relatively tall height of around 6 feet. Her hair was an interesting shade of green that reminded Naruto of his fellow Jinchuriki, Fu. Though, this woman's hair was in the form of long tresses that fell nearly to her waist. Her shapely body was completely uncovered, leaving her sizable breast and vagina out for view. Naruto had absolutely no intention of soaking in the view as he kept his eyes locked on the woman's smirking, heart-shaped face. He wasn't going to allow a voluptuous body get him killed. My skin used to be dry and cracked. My body felt sore and full of aches. My hips, wide and fat. The woman paused here to delicately place one of her hands against on her hip. Her fingers slid against its curve with an almost purposeful touch. They didn't remain idle for long at all as they ascended their way up her body. Her actions were once more slow as her hand glided over the curves of her body. The woman even made sure to gleam over her breasts before ending the movement with a large smile. Now, I feel renewed. Your presence has given birth to a new me. Thank you. She gave a small bow of her head to finish her statement. Naruto didn't seem to be the least bit pleased by her actions as a frown remained glued onto his lips. You still haven't told me who you are. The blonde's reply came out clipped. He felt uneasy in the woman's presence, and the longer she talked, the worse he felt. Unlike before when her presence had non-existent, now he felt her all around him. Despite her being directly in front of him, she felt as if she was at his right, his left, above, below and behind him. It was an unnerving feeling, and it took everything within him not to lash out at it. My womb has birthed everything around you. I am the oldest and most beloved out of all. My influence stretches beyond just the silly boundaries called pantheons that my children have made. I am all their mothers and they are all my children. I've been called Jord, Nokomis, Pachamama, Frame, Dui Sri, Gia and many more. I am the mother goddess. I am Mother Nature. The woman presented herself with a kindly smile. Her smile did very little to calm the blonde down. At the revelation of her title, Naruto felt his stomach drop out from under him. If what the woman said was true, he was talking to nature itself. This was not good. Well, Nature-san. I would prefer if you call me Ka-san. With how connected you've been to me, I would feel shame if you called me anything else. The woman said with a disarming smile. As a chill traveled up his spine, Naruto had a feeling that calling the woman anything other than what she requested would not be a good idea. Naturally, he decided to follow that feeling. Ka-san, if possible. The woman's smile seemed to grow twice in size at his words. Despite the oddity of calling a woman other than his actual mother Ka-san, the boy was thankful that he didn't manage to anger her. Yet, thank you for your visit. I appreciate you letting me borrow your energy. The blonde decided to start off with a show of thanks. If this woman had even a fraction of the power he thought she had, he needed to be on her good side. The blonde figured that he was doing a pretty good job of it when the woman let loose a sweet-sounding laugh. He found himself nervously returning the laugh with a smile of his own as the primordial being approached him. He took notice that with each step she took, her feet would rise and fall out of the ground almost as if she was walking in a thin pool of water. You thank me, child, when I'm the one who should be thanking you. That energy you call natural was disgusting. The woman's expression turned at this. Naruto felt a slight shift in the wind around him as her smile twisted into a frown. Millenniums of abuse made it that way. The children that I birthed, the ones who swore to keep their mother's heart sacred above all else, they abandoned me. Some even tried to steal from me. I allowed it. Oh, what a foolish old woman I am. The woman's lament struck a chord within the blonde's heart. It also made him want to run away as far as possible from the woman, considering her words reminded him very strongly of Gaia. He was just happy that she seemed much kinder and less demented than her alien chakra goddess counterpart. You haven't forgotten me though. The woman's sad expression turned suddenly as she directed her full attention at Naruto. A shiver traveled down his spine at her expression. He didn't need any sort of empathetic ability to feel the amount of affection and adoration the goddess was sending him. From the moment you stepped foot here, you've been with me. You've bathed in my presence every day. You purified me. You touched me in a way that my husband wasn't even able to. Naruto's natural instinct to run grew louder in his head as the woman came closer to him. When she reached out to touch his face, he had to use every bit of willpower he had not to flinch. Even when she began to run her hand up and down his cheek, the blonde stood strong, even leaning into the touch at one point to appease the woman. What have you gotten yourself into? Kurama's voice echoed through the blonde's head as the woman began to lean her head closer to Naruto's. The blonde didn't even bother to reply. He was too panicked to do it anyway. As the woman's lips grew closer and closer to his, the blonde mentally weighed his options. He could either let the woman kiss him, making him feeling guilty and forcing him to somehow explain the situation to his girlfriend, or he could move the woman away, possibly incurring her wrath and most likely guaranteeing his death. In the end, Naruto decided to stay in the middle ground. At the last possible moment, he moved his head slightly to the side, placing his cheek in the path of her lips. When her lips connected with his cheek, he had expected some type of violent retaliation. He hadn't expected for a sudden surge of nature energy to come rushing through him. There was no need to purify this energy. Instead of the usual taint he dealt with, the blonde found that this natural energy was completely free of it. His body felt powered and rejuvenated with the energy running through it. He felt as if he could sprint the entirety of the city within a matter of moments. It felt amazing. Just as quickly as the feeling came, it disappeared. An amused chuckle brought Naruto out of his miniature trance. The goddess in front of him was the origin of the sound. While he was slightly confused on what had just occurred, he was glad to see that Gaia didn't seem put off by his attempt to dodge her kiss. I respect your loyalty, Naruto. The woman cooed out his name. He couldn't help but squirm beneath her gaze as it raked up and down his body. That feeling you experienced, that's how you make me feel each and every day. I know that I cannot have you at this moment, so I request that you only continue to make me feel this way. Naruto took notice of her usage of this moment. Due to those words, he had no doubt in his mind that his interaction with the goddess wouldn't be limited to this one single meeting. That thought wasn't the most pleasant of thoughts, but he pushed it to the side. For now, he was just grateful he was alive. I can do that. Naruto's mumbled response earned him another smile from the woman. She nodded at his words before turning her back on him and walking towards the tree line. Naruto watched her make her way all the to the clearing's edge before stopping and turning her head towards him. My great-grandson, the one who holds the most domain of my underbelly. He approaches with an army. I give you permission to remind him of his place. Gaia flashed him one last dazzling smile before turning her head forward. Naruto watched as she took a step into the tree line. Almost instantly, the presence that had been so overwhelming to him faded away into nothing. As she drew further and further into the forest, it almost felt as if she was never there in the first place. It was only the tingling of his body caused by her kiss that Naruto managed to convince himself that he hadn't just had a very realistic illusion. You just earned yourself a new ally, brat. Kurama spoke as Gaia disappeared amongst the trees. Naruto remained silent for a few moments before a deep groan left his lips. An ally or a new hurdle? The blonde thought in response to his partner's words. After his interactions with the goddess, he was sure that he could label a woman an ally. He just wasn't too sure if her label for him was just an ally or something much more. You can't do much better than Mother Earth, boy. As long as you continue using your sage mode, you've got an ally. I say embrace it and deal with it. Naruto rolled his eyes at the fox's words but said nothing else in response. He knew that the beast was right. He wasn't going to stop purifying the natural energy and using sage mode anytime soon. He was stuck with this now. If she was telling the truth, then Hades is about to show up. I should warn the other factions. Another sigh rolled out of the blonde's mouth at this thought. So early in the morning and his day was already looking to be a complete drag. I don't understand. The clone wanted to rip his hair out. He would have done it too if he knew if it would result in him dispelling or not. He may have been a clone, but he had morals. He wouldn't escape to the sweet bliss of death just so another clone would have to suffer in his place. Look, Ophis, the Naruto clone paused to make sure that the dragon was listening. When she released a subtle nod, he decided to press further. Sex isn't something that just feels good. It's more than that. It's special. The clone tried to explain it in the clearest way he could. The subject matter was something he surely didn't want to discuss with the young girl. How is it special? The clone held in a groan at her question. Questions were a good thing. Questions could lead to progress. It's special because you're supposed to do it with people you care about. It's like the topping on the cake. It sort of sweetens and seals the deal. The clone wanted to pat himself on the back for that one. Managing to connect sex to cake should make it easy for the dragon to understand. Care. Ophis looked down as she mumbled the word. Naruto watched as she seemed to ponder the thought for almost a full minute before looking back up at him with her wide gray eyes. Do you not care about me? The girl's wide eyes, diminutive voice, and the wording of her sentence almost tore the clone's heart out of his chest. Inwardly, he cursed his creator to hell for leaving him here to deal with the dragon. Anything could have been better than somehow being guilt-tripped by a dragon god that was infinitely older than himself. It's not like that. I do care about you. That's why I'm taking care of you. Once more, the clone tried to explain his logic to the dragon. If only he knew how pointless of an endeavor it truly was. If you care, why can't we have sex? The word sounded so wrong coming out of her mouth, attached to those big, wide eyes. The situation was beginning to eat away at him the longer he looked at the dragon. Because we can't. Any hopes of making Ophis understand basic logic was beginning to slip away inside him. He only wanted the conversation to end at this point. Why not? Unluckily for him, Ophis seemed to have other plans. Just because, Ophis. That isn't an answer. And just like that, all hopes of getting out of this situation disappeared from the clone's mind. He wished he could have been anywhere other than here. Even when the memory of one of his fellow clones being ripped in half by a scythe reached his mind, he would have much rather been out on the battlefield than trying to explain stuff to Ophis. Getting cut by reapers was probably less painful. This has not happened as expected. Hades was a knowledgeable man. He was by far no genius, but his domain granted him a grand knowledge on various things. The old saying of dead men tell no tales was only true if you weren't the god of the dead. When he demanded it, the dead men sang for him, but even the knowledge of the dead couldn't have prepared him for this. He had summoned an army of Grim Reaper to lead his attack on Kuo, the resting place of the impudent infant god. It was supposed to be a surprise attack which would result in the deaths of hundreds of people, furthering his domain. When he had forced open the portals to the Underworld and the living world, he had expected no enemy presence. What he got in return was the exact opposite. Angels, fallen angels, and devils, a squadron full of them each, greeted his troops. They were waiting for them and it showed. Within seconds of sighting them, the supernatural creatures charged at their deaths-causing counterparts. Despite the lack of an element of surprise, his troops managed to fare well. Their sides made quick work of those with lesser ability. The quicker ones learned from their comrades' deaths and fought the Reapers from a distance, drawing out the battle to its current stage. The Christian's presence bothers me, though. Hades frowned to himself as he sat upon his throne in his stretch of the underworld. Lying at his feet was a pool of liquid that was reflecting the battle taking place at Kuo. With the birds and the tainted at the city, their leaders can't be too far behind. I can handle one of them alone, maybe two. But all three, if they revealed their real power, even I am not confident in my capability to defeat them. The god frowned at this. He hated the feeling of being unsure, especially in terms of his own power. Ever since he had blown past Zeus in terms of power, he had left insecurity in the past. That child has yet to reveal himself, too. At the moment, things weren't looking good for his assault. He hadn't ordered this assault on Kuo to lose. And, with his troops down on the battlefield, he wouldn't allow himself to lose. I was hoping to save these for Cerzex and his little corner of my underworld. But, I feel this is much more important. A soft sigh left the man's mouth. Despite his body consisting only of bones, the sound managed to echo through his personal chambers. With a lazy wave of his hand that sent the sleeve of his dark cloak floating in the air, the god summoned a grim reaper to his side. Release those beasts we tortured out of that human onto the city. Make sure that they are released over top of the city, preferably directly over that stupid candy shop. I want it destroyed. The grim reaper nodded at his master's command before faded from existence. With his minion gone, Hades refocused his attention on the pool of liquid. Come out and play, child. I wish to reap you if your soul and powers. You're bored, don't say that. You'll jinx me. Not trying to jinx you. I'm just pointing out fact. Naruto rolled his eyes while ducking underneath a lopsided swing from a grim reaper. Without any remorse, he sent one of his truth-seeking orbs rocketing into the creature's unprotected body. Within moments of impact, the Reaper had disintegrated into nothing while Naruto moved on to his next victim. With their sides, the Reaper was definitely dangerous enemies. He had watched dozens of devils, angels, and fallen angels fall instantly from a single nick of the weapon. They were floating, menacing shades of death. But they were slow. Very slow. They were some of the slowest enemies he had faced since arriving in this universe. And their slowness made them easy targets. I don't care if you're not trying to or not. Every single time I start to feel comfortable and think things are going my way, something huge comes out of nowhere and squashes my hopes. I'm not letting it happen, Kurama. Naruto mentally shouted to his partner as he guided his 9 orbs around him. His name seemed to take literal form as he cut a hot path through the army of grim reapers. The creatures stood not a single chance as before they could even think to move to counter the blonde, their existence would be wiped away by the truth-seeking orbs. His assault earned him the attention of ally and enemy alike, his golden cloak and the path of destruction surrounding him made spotting him rather easy. You're such a brat. You worry too. Before Kurama could finish his sentence, a ripple of air struck his container, knocking him off path. With a quick burst of chakra, he was back on path and searching for the disturbance. What he found, he definitely did not like. High above the city, a portal had come to existence. And currently crawling its way out of the portal was a hideous-looking creature. Its features seemed to morph and shift with each passing moment as it stuck its body further and further out of the portal. It's the Jabberwocky. Naruto heard the shout come from behind him but paid it no mind. His attention was focused on the creature as it fell from the portal with a deafening crack before falling down onto the city. The city shook violently as the 100-meter-long body impacted with the earth. I told you, Kurama. I told you. Shut your mouth and do something about it. Naruto was about to do just that but was forced to dodge yet another grim reaper attempting to take his head off. A quick glance around him showed that he had been surrounded by grim reaper in the short time he was observing the monsters. I have other things to deal with. It's time for you to get off your lazy ass and do something. Naruto mentally shouted to his partner as he began to circle the orbs around his body. You want me to do something? Fine, brat. That was the last mental thought Naruto received from the thought before their mental link went silent. With his partner out of his mind, the blonde turned his attention outward to the group of grim reapers around him. You all shouldn't have come here because I'm about to kick your ass. A deep rumble traveled through the city as the Jabberwocky walked. Its massive form crushed the line of buildings beneath it, yet it did not care. For it had been created for one purpose. The purpose of destruction. The creature opened its mouth wide to let loose its terrifying screech, but stopped when he felt a sudden rush of air hit its head. It turned towards the direction of the wind, only to receive a wrecking ball-sized bullet of air to slam into its jaw, sending it rocketing off its dozen of feet. "Sniped ya!" A voice shouted from a distance. Before the creature could find earth again, it was suddenly snatched from the air and lifted upward. Disoriented from the hit and the sudden change of motion, it took the Jabberwocky several seconds to right itself to see what was currently carrying it skyward. Its eyes met with a massive blue, armored beetle that was sending what resembled a smirk down at it. "Glad you joined us on our flight," Chome amusingly shouted at its passenger. The Jabberwocky didn't seem as amused by its flight as it began to screech and shake in the beetle's grip. "You want to get off so soon? Fine. Have a nice swim." That was the last thing the creature heard from Chome before it found itself suddenly released from the beetle's hold. It managed to hold its screech on the entire flight downward before eventually being silenced when it slammed into the lake. Underneath the lake and safe from the beetle, the Jabberwocky attempted to regain some sense of the balance he had entered the fight with. Unfortunately for it, it wouldn't have much time to do that. Just as it began to recover from its drop, it felt two appendages wrap tightly around its massive neck. It attempted to shriek once more but found its voice muffled by the water. "You're not allowed in my hiding spot." The Jabberwocky could just barely make out a voice from behind it as it tried to shake off its appendage. It only just managed to catch a glimpse of a massive turtle before the tailed beast's third tail smacked into the creature, sending coral sprouting across its body and launching it from out the lake. The Jabberwocky's flight was much shorter this time around, managing to last only a few seconds before it crashed into the forested areas surrounding the lake. It didn't expect this. It had expected an easy fight. It had expected a slaughter. It had expected a complete massacre. It certainly didn't expect to meet creatures that managed to match its size. It definitely didn't expect those creatures to fight with such ferocity. And most of all, it didn't expect one of those creatures to be currently standing over its body with its mouth wide open and a massive black orb sitting inside of it. The Jabberwocky didn't even have time to scream before the Bijadama slammed into his head. The attack instantly disintegrated every piece of flesh it touched. Kurama kept the attack going for a full 10 seconds even though he only needed one. When the fox finally closed its mouth, a barren path almost a mile long cut through the forest. The Jabberwocky was nowhere in sight. "Do something, eh? Beat that, brat." In the minds of the supernatural creatures watching Naruto, he had certainly beat that. The army of Grim Reaper that had once been pouring out of the portal and surrounded the blonde was no more. Instead, only a small trickle of the creatures would appear out of the still open portal. Though, as soon as they surfaced, they would be picked off by surrounding angels and devils. "Amazing! Did you see how quick he killed those Grim Reapers? He didn't even get touched. He really may be a god." That last comment was the one that set Naruto off. He turned to correct the devil who uttered the phrase only to stop when an overwhelming presence landed upon his shoulders. Judging by the frozen men and women around him, they too felt the presence. "You have a disturbing amount of power for a supposed candy god. Though, the new titles I've seen attached to your wretched name may explain that." Naruto quickly located the source of the presence coming from behind it. A soft sigh left the blonde's mouth before turning to face the voice. Hades was how Naruto imagined a stereotypical god of death. The man didn't possess any flesh, consisting of solely of bones. Ripped black robes covered the god's body as he floated in the middle of the air. Clutched in the god's hand was a massive scythe with a midnight black shaft and a gleaming silver blade. All in all, the god gave off a very creepy aura while he stared at Naruto. "I am not a god. I'm letting you know this right now." He was hoping by some small chance that the god would go away and let him be. But as the god of death opened its jaw to speak, he knew that things weren't going to go the way he wanted. "In comparison to me, child, you're right. You're not a god. You're an insect that I will crush like I've done with so many before you." A groan left Naruto at Hades' response. "Looks like another fight would be inevitable. It's always the hard way. Don't worry, child. It's already over." The last sentence echoed from behind Naruto, forcing him to turn around. Hades was now stood behind him with his scythe raised high into the air. Unlike his grim reapers, the god didn't seem to have any problems with speed as he brought the scythe speeding down towards Naruto. The blonde ducked low, allowing the blade to pass over top of his head before springing forward, sending his punch crashing into the god's gut. The satisfying sound of fist against bone met his ears before the god was sent rocketing backward through the sky. The god's flight lasted only for a few short meters before he managed to correct himself. "You can actually touch me. Maybe you have a little more power than I thought, you infant god. I'm not an in. Silence and give me your soul." The god didn't allow Naruto any time to speak before shooting towards him. The teen was forced to enter a backward flight as Hades started swinging wildly at his body. With each swing, the blade managed to pass only inched away from the blonde's body but never touched, a fact that seemed to frustrate the god of death. "Die!" Hades shouted once more before releasing a sickly purple aura from his body in a wide wave. Due to the proximity of the duo and the speed of the attack, Naruto was unable to dodge the attack when it slammed into him. Surprisingly, to both Naruto and Hades, the attack did nothing. So shocked was the god that he actually stopped his attack to stare at the blonde. "How? I've brought the entirety of Olympus down to their knees with that attack. How are you not affected?" Hades screamed before letting loose another wave of the attack. Against his better judgment, Naruto decided to allow the attack to him. Like before, the wave of purple energy slammed into him and did absolutely nothing. The blow didn't even do so much as tickle him as he looked at Hades with an increasing amount of amusement building up inside of him. "Are you a death god? This shouldn't be possible. Even Osiris was affected by it. What type of god are you? I told you. I'm not just some god." Naruto punctuated the last word by punching the god straight in the stomach, folding the god in two. With his back lowered, the blonde raised his right leg high above his head before sending it crashing down upon the god's exposed back. The force behind the kick countered whatever force was keeping the god afloat and sent the man careening down towards the ground. The skeleton man slammed into the ground with a loud crash, his body forming a crater on impact. Hopefully he got the message, Naruto thought to himself before floating down towards the crater. Hades remained motionless during the descent, something that the blonde was happy to see. He'd rather not have to continue the fight. "Who?" Naruto heard the god rasp out as his feet met the earth. He walked the short distance separating him from the god before standing over his prone form. Who are you working with, boy? What are you talking about?" "I'm not working with anyone," Naruto said in the most genuine voice he could muster. He honestly was lost on what the god was attempting to convey. "No god has the kind of power you have so suddenly." Hades suddenly barked out, sending Naruto into a defensive stance. Despite the raised volume of his voice, the god did not move. "Who blessed you? Was it Yama? That bitch, Izanami?" "Who? No one did anything to me. That was all me." "Lies!" Hades bellowed out, sending his aura spilling forth once more. Just like before, the wave of purple energy had absolutely no effect on the blonde. This act proved infuriating to the god, especially as he watched the ground and grass around him decay from his power. "I can sense it in you. Deep inside your core. I can feel death. I will rip it from your stomach and take it for my own." Naruto didn't even allow the god to finish his threat. With a tired thought, the blonde sent all 9 of his orbs slamming into the god's body. A scream ripped out of the god's throat as the orbs pierced his body. When the first crack in his skeleton formed, Hades' fate was sealed. Within seconds of the first crack, the skeleton shattered. The shattered pieces never got to reach the ground before they disintegrated into air, leaving no trace of the god's presence except for his scythe. "I wonder if he died or if he's just reforming," Naruto thought to himself before bending down to pick up the scythe. As soon as his fingers made contact with the shaft of the weapon, he felt an explosion of power centered around his stomach before a chillingly familiar presence appeared before him. With no small amount of nervousness, the blonde turned to face the presence. Inwardly, Naruto had to admit that his world's Shinigami was much scarier than anything Hades could produce. The creature's gray skin, snow-white hair, sword in mouth and ripped white cloak made for a rather intimidating sight. With the god staring down directly at him, Naruto could do nothing but hope that he wasn't here for him. Surprisingly, after almost a full minute of eye contact, nothing happened to Naruto. He straightened up to his full height while sending the pale, still image of the Shinigami a confused glance. He briefly looked at the scythe still in his hand before looking back at the Shinigami. What if? The blonde thought to himself before releasing the staff. As soon as his fingers left the scythe, the image of the death god disappeared. The blonde managed to catch the scythe before it could hit the ground, summoning the Shinigami back into view. At the revelation, Naruto couldn't help but be amazed as he looked in between the weapon and the Shinigami. This is so cool. The teen couldn't help but think to himself as he released and caught the scythe repeatedly, summoning and dismissing the Shinigami with a simple touch. A chuckle left his mouth as he began to pass the weapon in between his two hands, forcing the Shinigami to flicker in and out of existence at a ridiculous frequency. That's enough fun. I wonder if Kurama took care of the beasts. Oh, I did. Though, you shouldn't be worrying about what I took care of. What are you talking about? Look above you, brat. Naruto decided to take his friend's advice and looked towards the sky. His heart almost fell out of his stomach when he took notice of the mass amount of devils, angels, and fallen angels floating above him. All the beings looked shocked as they stared down at him. All it took was a quick glance at the scythe in his hand and the Shinigami behind him for the blonde to put the pieces together. This is not what it looks like. Chapter 33. Naruto was not having a good day. In fact, he was having an absolutely horrible day. It was quite possibly one of the worst days he had had since arriving in this dimension. Sorry, Naruto. We weren't quick enough to stop the thing from landing on your shop. Nanabai's voice echoed through his mind as he stared at the crushed remains of his shop. Splintered wood, fragmented glass and remnants of sugary treats were among some of the few things that he could spot in the wreckage. It's fine. The blonde sighed out as he turned his back on the wrecked shop. The whole block was in a similar condition. The destruction of the street and the late hour of the day left the teen all alone to bask in the destruction of his livelihood. I can always rebuild. I just had a long day. He didn't get a reply at this and he was grateful for that. After the day he didn't really feel like talking. He just wanted to go home and rest. And it was with these thoughts that Naruto began to walk. The first face that greeted Naruto when he opened his door immediately alerted him that a simple night of rest wasn't as close as he wanted it to be. Going off the memories of his clone, he would be having a bit of a discussion with the dragon in front of him. Naruto initially said nothing as he stepped into the living room of his home. He allowed the door to slowly swing close behind him before focusing his full attention on Ophis. The two entered into a sort of staring contest as neither said nothing while keeping eye contact with one another. You look tired. Ophis broke the silence with her statement. Naruto gave a short nod of his head before a yawn forced his mouth open. Ophis watched the male hold the yawn for several seconds before it ended with a low sigh. Yeah, I had a long day. In the back of his mind, Naruto was hoping that the dragon would be able to pick up on his hint. He really did not believe he had the energy nor patience to try and explain anything to her right now. I understand. The blonde's eyebrow nearly shot up off his face at her words. The excitement that filled him was so much that unconsciously reached down and swept the dragon up in a massive bear hug. Thank you so much. Ophis' whole body tensed up at the sudden physical contact. The girl was beginning to blast the boy with a bit of her power, believing he had decided to turn on her in her weakened state. When she felt no pain or discomfort from the physical contact, she allowed her power to die down within her. Instead, she decided to indulge herself in the sense of warmth and comfort that she felt from her proximity to her host. Just as Ophis was beginning to really enjoy the embrace, it ended as Naruto placed her back on the ground. Despite her usual control over her facial features, the dragon's face clearly showed her disappointment at being put down. Unfortunately for her, Naruto had already moved past her and was halfway to his bedroom. Good night, Kuroka. Night, Ophis. The blonde shouted before scooping up Kaneko in his arms, who had been waiting by the doorway to the living room. Within a matter of seconds, the duo had disappeared into their now shared bedroom. By the time the door closed behind the couple, Ophis had managed to regain her control over her emotions. She turned toward the only remaining person in the room. Kuroka had been in the living room and had watched the whole interaction between Naruto and Ophis. She had gotten a rather clear view of the look on the dragon's face and could have swore she spotted a blush on her cheeks when Naruto put her down. She, of course, mentioned none of this as Ophis turned to face her. Are they going to have sex? Kuroka could only blink at the dragon's question. It was in that moment that she could have swore she sensed a tiny hint of jealousy in Ophis' voice. No. I think they're just going to sleep. The older Nekasha wisely decided to say no to the question, even if she did believe that the two teens would end up fooling around later during the night. Having an angry god under the same roof as her was not something she wanted to deal with tonight. Ophis nodded at this before dropping her head. Kuroka watched the girl remain still for several long moments before lifting her head with a soft hum. I will be in my room. That was all Ophis said before walking and disappearing down the home's hallway. Kuroka heard the opening and closing of a door several seconds later, leaving her as the sole person in the room. What the hell is wrong with this house? When Naruto woke up the next morning, he had gone through the mental routine of preparing himself for a long day of work. After his daily purification, he would have to spend the day clearing out the wreckage of his shop. He had already decided to use clones for the occasion. He wouldn't make his job harder for the sake of attempting to dissuade people from believing something they already clearly believed in. But, when the teen arrived at the site of his ruined shop, he encountered something much different. The scattered pieces of wood that had made up the frame of his shop was gone. The remains of his surplus inventory was nowhere to be seen. Even the powdered sugar that had dusted the ground not even 12 hours before wasn't there. In their place stood something much more grand. A wooden base almost as tall as him sat where his shop once stood. The wood glowed a beautiful amber within the early morning light. Supports shot up out from the base and stood nearly 5 stories high. The supports leaned heavily against the unfinished stone statue that jutted out of the platform. Oh no! The thought flashed through the boy's mind as he began to soak in the details of the statue. It was unfinished, assumingly because of the fact that it had been started only last night, yet several visible details sent warning bells ringing off inside of his head. The statue was obviously meant to be of a person. The pair of marble legs that made up nearly half of the statue's height made that clear to the blonde. This part wasn't very worrying to the blonde. No, it was the upper half of the statue that was making him question getting out of bed this morning. From the neck upward, the statue remained one solid structure, uncompleted. Downward, however, an immense amount of precise work had been done. Whoever had worked on the statue had been no amateur. As his eyes scanned over its outstretched arms, Naruto was sure of it. The creator had somehow managed to chisel the stone so it looked as if the statue was ripe with muscle. With each passing glance, the blonde almost swore to himself that the thing was moving due to how fluid it all looked. Attached to the outstretched arm was a completed hand, and placed on top of that hand was the cause of the blonde's distress. If it had been anything else, he could have written the similarities between himself and statue as mere coincidence. But the fact that a tray filled with various treats, including his Uzumaki sweet rolls, made him face the grim reality of the situation. They had built a statue of him. Why? The blonde questioned as he continued to stare at the structure. Out of all the possible things he had expected to wake up to this morning, a statue of himself had been nowhere close to his mind. The better question is, how did they make it so quickly? We were just here last night. Kurama's voice rang through the teen's mind, and he couldn't help but agree with the fox. It should have been nearly physically impossible for a group of humans to make so much progress within a single night. The thought of it actually occurring was so outlandish that he was finding it hard to even begin to wrap his mind around it. Candy-sama. Naruto felt his heart drop in his chest as those words hung in the air. He reluctantly turned his head and saw a middle-aged man running his way. We are so sorry, Candy-sama. We weren't able to finish your memorial in time for your arrival today. Despite how winded he seemed from him run, the man still decided to bow to the blonde. Naruto inwardly cringed at the gesture while outwardly he moved to correct the man. Please don't bow to me. It's weird. The blonde said, hoping internally that his words would at least be able to deter the man from repeating the act. He still hadn't grown used to the levels of worship some people thought it was appropriate to show him, and at this rate, he was beginning to think he would never grow used to it. Of course, Candy-sama. I apologize. The man rose his head to speak, then looked as if he was about to bow once more, but managed to stop himself before he could go through the full motion. Naruto sighed to himself at the sight of this. He had a feeling he would be dealing with a lot of this very soon. So? The word came out slow as the blonde raised his hand to rub the back of his neck. The silence that had settled between the two had quickly become awkward, and he very much wanted to end it. What about my shop? Naruto said while turning his head to look at the massive unfinished statue. While he knew the thing would eventually turn around and become a massive pain in the ass, he could at least appreciate the sentiment. Though, with its existence, there was a serious lack of space when it came to his shop. That we already have covered for you, Candy-sama. By the way the man's face brightened up as he spoke, Naruto knew he was in for something special. Without any warning, the man turned on his heel and began to run in the opposite direction. The teen watched him go got several seconds, very much confused on what had just happened. It was only when the strange man had managed to run a full block length away from the boy that he decided to follow after him. Please don't let this be terrible. It could be worse. It definitely could be worse. In all honesty, if the blonde was being truthful for himself, the situation he had found himself in wasn't bad at all. It was the exact opposite of that. We apologize on our inability to get you something that wasn't grander. With the suddenness of yesterday's events, we only had but so much time. Despite Naruto's request, the man found himself bowing in the presence of his god. Usually, the teen would have attempted to reprimand him, but he was currently busy staring at the building in front of him. Unlike his shop, this building stood at an impressive 3 stories high. Most of the structure looked to be made out of wood while stone supports around the exterior. The front door was made entirely out of glass and a single clear window display sat on either side of it. Taped over top of the door stood a large banner that had the words Candy-sama written in red paint and surrounded by several Uzumaki swirls. Is this really mine? Naruto asked, not quite believing the situation he had found himself in. Once again, his day was going nowhere like what he had expected it to go earlier in the morning. His long day of building had been instantly squashed by this new building. Of course. It was unanimous among city officials that you deserved the shop. The city wouldn't be the same without you and your business. In an odd sort of way, Naruto found his words to be some of the most endearing he had heard since his arrival in this universe. He had somehow managed to earn the affection of a whole city and, despite the overzealous worship that came along, it made him feel pleasant. It was almost as if he had become Hokage, just with candy. Wow! I honestly don't know what to say. He truly felt speechless. A part of him believed he was still dreaming. No need to say anything, Candy-sama. After everything you've done for this city, this is the least we can do. The man said with a bright smile stretched across his face. The grin soon left his mouth when he glanced down at his watch. Oh, Candy-sama. Naruto's eye twitched at this. His title being synonymous for God wasn't something he was looking forward to. I have to prepare for work. I'm sorry but I must go. I hope everything is to your liking. I will see you later today for the grand opening. The man blurted out the words before turning and taking off. Naruto watched him go with no small amount of confusion and a single question playing against his brain. Grand opening? I swear to Kami if you drop another plate, I will dispel every single one of you. A chorus of yes sirs followed Naruto's shout. He gave a strong nod of his head before turning his attention to the utter chaos that was now his shop. Coming through, boss. A flash of gold zipped by the blonde's vision. Naruto could only sigh as he watched the flash drove in and out of the crowd of rambling people before eventually being swallowed crowd. The blonde could only hope he, and by extension, the plate of cookies he was carrying, had made it to their destination safely. They all came at once. 1 second, he had been adding his own personal touches to the rather Spartan interior. Within the next moment, customers came flooding in by the dozens. It was as if someone had flipped off a switch, releasing the barriers that had kept the candy lovers at bay. Boss, 10 more orders of the Uzumaki Swirl Special. One of his clones shouted over the noise of the shout. Naruto released a huff at this before turning toward the direction of the shout. I'm busy making cupcakes. Get off your ass and do it yourself. We're busy serving people. We can't do it. Naruto rolled his eyes before forming his fingers in a cross shape. With a loud pop and several small clouds of smoke, 3 new clones appeared by the blonde's side. 2 of you start making buns. 1 of you go out and get the dishes. Naruto barked out. The clones saluted at his words before dispersing in various directions. The blonde could only hope that they managed to complete their task while he returned his attention to the matter on hand. You seem busy. Naruto's eyes widened before he swiftly spun around. When his eyes drunk in the sight of his girlfriend, happiness flooded through him. He felt like a starving man who had just stumbled upon a buffet line. Without any thought, he reached down and trapped the girl in a massive hug before lifting her high off the ground. You have no idea how happy I am to see you. Naruto spoke into his girlfriend's ear. Kaneko couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at the boy's odd behavior as she remained high into the air. "You saw me this morning," Kaneko said just as Naruto lowered her back onto the ground. The panic that had once been settled on the blonde's face had been cleared away and replaced with his usual coat of happiness. "Yeah, but you were sleeping and wouldn't even open your eyes to say goodbye." Kaneko rolled her eyes at her boyfriend's words but still couldn't help the smile that popped up on her face. The morning had been rather pleasant for her considering she had gotten the chance to sleep in an extra hour. The fact that the first few hours of it had been spent cuddled next to the shinobi had definitely helped improve its quality. "Candy-sama." The sound of a customer's voice cut through the duo's conversation. They both turned and saw a nervous teenage girl standing at the counter. I just wanted to thank you. My boyfriend and I hit a rough patch in our relationship a few weeks ago and I brought him a batch of your cookies to make it up. Since then, everything has been better than ever. So, thank you." The girl shouted the last sentence before bowing her head all the way down to waist level. Due to her bowed head, she missed the look that Naruto and Kaneko shared. She raised her upper body just in time for the teen shop owner to return his focus onto the girl. No problem, I guess." The words stumbled out of the blonde's mouth. He wasn't entirely sure on what to say in this situation. His clipped response seemed to appease the girl as she flashed him a bright smile. "Thank you, Candy-sama. I humbly request an offering of a dozen cookies from you. Please fulfill my request." The girl clapped her hands in front of her while giving another slight bow of her head. Naruto decided to forego any type of verbal reply and simply handed her a piece of paper with a price on it. The girl happily dug into her pockets and proceeded to place a small stack of bills onto the counter. Before Naruto could even begin to count them, the girl skipped away, leaving the blonde alone with an amused Kaneko. "Magical cookies?" Kaneko asked with a playful tone to her voice. Naruto turned to face her and saw that the girl was making a horrible attempt at trying to hide a grin. It was quite obvious to the teen that she found the situation nothing but amusing. "Must be why they taste so good." "No!" Naruto shot back almost immediately. He had to quickly settle himself when he noticed that his reaction seemed to only draw more amusement out of the Nekashu. "My cookies are good because I made them. There's no magic involved. Only Uzumaki skill." The blonde decided to punctuate his statement with a pose as he proudly raised both of his hands before his face. He held the pose for several seconds, only to receive one of Kaneko's patented deadpan looks. At that sight, the blonde's hands flopped down to his side while a large pout overcame his face. "You never feed into my fun," Naruto whined out. Kaneko rolled her eyes at her boyfriend's childish behavior before stepping forward and grabbing a hold of his hand. Almost instinctively, his hand melded into her own. "Not true. Last night." Kaneko softly cooed out so that only Naruto and herself could hear her words. She nearly laughed to herself when she felt his grip on her hand tighten. Even though his facial expression didn't change, she instantly knew through their held hands that her words had an effect on the boy. "It was too easy sometimes. You were a lot calmer this morning," Naruto mumbled out while attempting his best to keep his features muted. "Tired from last night." The words came out her mouth with a swiftness that was unusual for her. Naruto looked down at her to send her a glare but found his efforts immediately brushed away at the sight of her coy smile. In the end, Naruto could only huff and roll his eyes, silently admitting defeat. Kaneko picked up on his metaphorical white flag and released her grip on her hand while aiming a pointed yet amusing grin at her boyfriend. Naruto, struggling to scrape together the last bit of his pride, met her gaze with one of his own. "Am I interrupting something?" The moment between the duo came to a quick end at the sound of a deep voice. It managed to reach the two over the noise of the restaurant. The couple reluctantly broke eye contact, mentally agreeing with one another to continue their standoff later before turning to face the new arrival. Both were surprised to find Artemis stood at the counter, sending both of them a knowing look while clothed in her full combat garb. "What are you doing here, Artemis?" Naruto asked the goddess. While she had made a bit of a habit in dropping into his shops on random occasions, he hadn't seen her for a while. With the whole drama with Hades, she had temporarily left his mind. Now, though, with her standing in front of him, it was very hard to ignore her presence and its possible implications. "Oh." Before the goddess could answer, the blonde spoke out again. His surprised expression melted into one of worry as he began to slowly inch closer to Kaneko. I'm guessing you heard about Hades. When Artemis nodded, the blonde felt his heart sank deep into his chest. Inwardly, he cursed himself for not considering the implications of his actions before he blasted the death god. If he was understanding the book Dionysus had gave him, he had just killed a god who had familial connections with some of the most powerful creatures in the universe. One of them, the man's niece, was now standing before him. Do not worry, Naruto, Artemis spoke out, interrupting the blonde's panic. I do not come for retribution or vengeance. I am not a courier for Nemesis. By the confused expression the boy was sending her, the goddess quickly deduced that she needed to elaborate further. Your defeat of Hades has sent waves through our pantheon. His death has left the underworld in a bit of chaos. Naruto opened his mouth to apologize for the inconvenience but was immediately silenced by a single look from the woman. Do not apologize. Us Greeks do not abhor chaos. We all were born from it and eventually, we will return. We are just thankful that this is a temporary matter. My father plans on visiting this upcoming week and calming everything down. I am here for a different reason. Naruto raised an eyebrow at this before sparring a glance down at Kaneko. At least, he attempted to do so because when he looked down, she was no longer by his side. A swift turn to his other side allowed him to locate the girl at the other end of the bar, now with a tray of cookies in hand. He wasn't quite sure how she acquired the treat but could guess she had managed to bribe one of his clones to get it. Naruto. The blonde's attention was brought back onto Artemis as she called his name. I humbly request that you meet with me and several associates. The goddess punctuated the request with a hesitant but full bow of her head. Warning bells immediately went off in the boy's head at the gesture. Everything he had learned about Artemis from the books he had read and the woman herself had shown him that bowing to anyone was not something she'd do willingly. This whole entire situation screamed of trouble to him, and after dealing with Hades' nonsense only a day prior, he was not in the mood to encounter more. Who and why do they want to meet with me? Naruto asked. He was already planning to deny the request, considering its shady premise, but he decided that at least listening to the woman was the least he could do. A group of beings who wish to revolutionize the world wish for your assistance in. Naruto groaned at the woman's words. After what had occurred yesterday, those were not the type of words he wanted to hear today. Those words carried an implication that he would eventually have to deal with. Artemis. I know what you're going to say. The goddess cut the blonde off. You wish to avoid this all. To stay docile. I can understand the sentiment. Yet, change is not something you can run from. It would be best if you were part of it to help shape it. Well, what gives us the right to go around changing stuff? Naruto decided to shoot back. It was obvious Artemis wasn't just going to let this drop without a fight, and he wasn't in the mood to lay down and lose this one. We are divine. God, Titan, primordial beings capable of feats that humans can only dream of. When it comes down to it, our influence is what makes this world runs. And right now, a large majority of us realize that change is needed. Artemis shot back her response without any hesitation. The words flowed out of her mouth with a level of eloquence and suffocation that the blonde hadn't expected. He was caught off guard and Artemis joyfully took advantage of it. Change is coming, Naruto. I plead that you decide to take part in it. The town lake, 10 p.m. I await your arrival. Artemis bowed her head at this. Naruto remained silent as she turned away from him. The crowd of people split like the Red Sea as the goddess retreated toward the door. He watched as she opened the doors to the new building before disappearing down the streets of Ko. You're going to go. Naruto nearly leapt out of his skin at the sudden sound of his girlfriend's voice. He swiftly spun and saw that the girl was now, and probably for some time, standing behind him. A lone cookie sat in her grip while she looked at him with the expectant expression he had come to adore over the course of their relationship. The blonde sighed before slowly leaning down toward the girl. Kaneko watched as his head grew closer and closer to her own. Inwardly, she was preparing herself for a comforting kiss from the blonde. If what she heard from her bit of eavesdropping, he would be needing one to get through the rest of the day. Instead of a kiss, Kaneko received something severely less pleasant as Naruto's head swerved off its initial course and dived toward her hand. Before she could react, his teeth dug deep into the body of her cookie. A small part of her cried out at the beheading of her snack. The smug look that had settled onto her boyfriend's face after the horrible act nearly made her see red. She was about to leap up at him and show her just how little she appreciated his actions but was halted when Naruto held out his hand at her. "What is this?" the girl questioned as she looked at his outstretched hand. Sitting upon its calloused surface was a sphere-shaped object. It looked rather harmless with its black surface and the golden sparkles littered on top of it, but after watching the blonde mercilessly destroy her cookie, she wasn't ready to trust him just yet. "A new item I've been working on all morning. I want you to try it out." The innocent tone of Naruto's voice did little to disarm Kaneko, yet the girl couldn't resist the temptation of the treat in front of her. With caution, she reached up and snatched the sphere out of the blonde's hand. She rolled it around in her hand, examining every inch of its circle. When her eyes discovered nothing amiss, she raised it up to her nose and gave it a few quick whiffs. Her cheeks nearly burst with redness at the scent of sweetness that greeted her sense of smell. But, other than that, nothing seemed wrong with the treat. She gave one last cautious look up at Naruto before tentatively biting into the shell of the treat. Naruto had to hold back his laughter at the harmonious sound of Kaneko's moan. As soon as her teeth sunk into the treat, her eyes closed in silent acceptance of the deliciousness she held in her head. She involuntarily clutched it to her chest as her mouth was bombed with the array of flavors contained in the delicacy. He knew then that he had a hit on his hands. "What is this?" Kaneko spoke breathlessly as she opened her eyes. The Nekasho looked to be in shock as she stared expectantly up at Naruto. Her mind had been metaphorically blown by the snack and she needed to learn more to piece it back together. "I think I'm going to call it a sweet-seeking ball. A milk chocolate shell that protects a brownie shell that surrounds a ball of cheesecake that has a tiny bit of vanilla custard in the middle. They're a pain to make but..." Naruto trailed off when he finally took notice that he had lost the girl's attention in favor of the dessert. Unperturbed by her decision, the blonde slyly slid her a plate filled with the balls before picking her up and setting her down on one of his stools. When she failed to respond to that, Naruto knew he had officially distracted the girl and could go back to making sure his shop didn't burn down. "Dad, if you would just let me do the talk." "Nonsense, boy. I survived getting my body chopped into a million pieces and I can survive a conversation." He watched the bickering duo enter into the shop. Any severity that their argument may have contained was instantly thrown out of the window by the blonde at a single glance at their appearance. Their attire was fine, it consisting of rather luxe-looking black suits. They stood at respectful heights, at least from what Naruto could assume. No, what really threw the blonde for a loop was certain personal features. The older one, at least Naruto assumed he was the oldest due to the way he addressed his son, looked to be wrapped from neck to toe in wrap. The pristine, white bindings did a good job in covering nearly every inch of skin of the man. The only thing that wasn't covered was the man's head. His rich, green skin was an oddity that blended rather well with his glowing green eyes. From the neck down, Naruto noted that the other gentleman looked completely normal. He looked like a normal, athletic and tan man in his suit. The weirdness came when he looked from the neck. That was when he was able to take notice that the man's head came in the form of a jackal. "Call me old, won't you? I get no respect nowadays. After all the things I did for you." If Naruto had more experience in judging the expressions of a jackal, he would have noticed that the younger male looked exasperated as he talked. Instead, the blonde could only oddly stare on as Jackal's snout pulled back towards his face while its eyes came to a close. The mummified man took no notice of the expression as he went about hobbling toward the counter. Naruto, for what felt like the 1000th time in the last hour, felt thankful that the trickle of customers had come to a slow. It allowed him to rest a little while also not worrying that too many people saw the strange display. The sight of the hobbling mummy in a suit was pretty comical, but the strange curses that left his mouth every few seconds probably wouldn't have been seen in such a positive light. "You're that new god everyone's been talking about." The man finally arrived at the blonde's counter and gladly plopped himself into one of the seats. His younger companion sighed out at his question before silently taking a seat next to him. Naruto could have honestly just sat and stared at the outrageous duo for a good 30 minutes but stopped himself from doing so to answer their question. "Would you believe me if I said I wasn't a god?" The pointed looks he received from both men made it perfectly clear what they thought of his question. Before he could refute their looks, the younger one slammed a binder down onto the counter's surface. Where he got the object, Naruto did not know, but the jackal-headed man seemed pretty familiar with it as he began to flip through its pages. Ability to purify natural energy. Managed to defeat and subjugated the infinite dragon god. Defeated the former leaders of the fallen angel faction. Killed a seraph-level angel. Fated Hades, the most powerful death god. That comment earned a disgruntled grumble from the older man, at which the jackal guy rolled his eyes before continuing. You even managed to break into the deepest recesses of heaven and escape captivity. This comment earned a snicker from the mummified man. The other two males turned and saw the man was barely holding himself back from bursting into laughter as he leaned heavily against the counter. That was the best one. That Michael up there thought his afterlife was so special. Now, look at him. Can't even stop a single god from poppin' up. Not so special now, ain't it? The old man spat out. Naruto could only blink at the man's odd statement while his associate sighed. Look, the jackal continued, bringing Naruto's attention back onto him. Call yourself whatever you want. Some people want to call themselves gods, some titans, some primordials, and some divine beings. We're not here for that. The man opened his mouth to continue speaking but was rudely cut off. You're making my job a pain in the ass, boy. The mummified man grunted out. You're making everyone's life a bit harder, ain't you? The confused look on the blonde's face clearly showed just how lost he was. The jackal-headed man was about to speak again but was silenced by a scathing glare from the mummy. Seeing that he wasn't going to get another word in, the man roughly closed his binder and settled in. If you ain't figure it out, boy, I'm Osiris. Original death god. I was here before any of these new, scythe-wielding bastards showed up. I'm from the generation where we used to flail our enemies. At this point in the conversation, Naruto was too lost to really understand what the hell the man was saying, but he was also too perturbed to ask any questions. I also govern the rebirth. Not just for certain humans but for gods too. They fight, they die, and they came back. Back then, it was a pain in the ass to go through, but I made the system as streamlined as possible. It was efficient. It was the assembly line of death. You die, you serve your time, and you come back to claim your domain back from whatever greedy bastard who decided to sink his paws into it. Osiris paused to send the younger male a glare. Dad, I was just ho. Don't give me any lip, boy. I ain't as merciful as I used to be. That shut the jackal right up. Osiris huffed victoriously before looking back toward Naruto. As I was saying, it was a simple process up until yesterday. I ain't expect Hades to die, but when I felt it, I expected to deal with his whining for a few months while he reformed. Instead, I get absolutely nothing. Nada. Zilch. Zero. Not even a drop of his essence. So? Naruto questioned, not entirely sure where the man was attempting to go with his words. So? You took it. You killed a god, boy. A death god, at that. Hades still had a good bit of clout left too, so that ain't a simple task. The man descended into a series of mumbles as he broke eye contact with Naruto. The blonde, seeing his chance to actually get some answers, immediately looked over to the jackal-headed man who looked absolutely ecstatic to be able to speak. What my dad is trying to say is that Hades isn't coming back. He's dead. And with his official death, his domain is left up in the air. I'm guessing he left some type of scythe when he died? Naruto nodded hesitantly at the question. Good. As long as you have that thing, consider yourself the new Hades. Welcome to the Death Club. The man's excited tone contrasted greatly with the horrified look on Naruto's face. You can't be serious, right? When his question was greeted with a nod, the blonde nearly fell to the floor. This was the exact opposite of what he wanted. Somehow, someway, he had found himself deeper in the utter chaos of godhood. First the statute and now the stupid scythe. What was next? Anyway, that's all we wanted to say. Be on the lookout for some minor gods looking to get an easy upgrade. I wouldn't want to be you in a couple of days. With each word out of the god's mouth, Naruto felt his heart sank lower and lower. The name is Anubis, by the way. If you ever need any help, feel free to give us a ring. Just break this and your message will get through. I have a feeling you'll be needing this soon. The man placed a tiny tombstone on the counter as he barked out a laugh. Naruto slowly pocketed the thing before while he watched Anubis attempted to coax his father to stand. Dad, it's time to go. It ain't time till I say so, Dad. Shut your trap, boy. I'm getting up. The man grumbled as he began to rise from the stool. He looked to be struggling briefly, prompting Anubis to step forward in an attempt to help. His act of kindness was quickly shot down when Osiris manifested a golden crook in his hand and used the weapon to slap away Anubis' hands. "The only help I need is from Isis. I'm still convinced she's hiding my..." Osiris' voice trailed off into incomprehensible mumbling at this point that had Naruto straining his ears. He didn't have to strain for long as the god suddenly cut himself off. He proceeded to slam the butt of his crook down onto the floor while staring directly at Naruto. "This ain't nature, boy. Death ain't all about sunshine, flowers and butterflies. It's impartial, it's cruel, it's sweet, it's painful and it's relieving. You better learn how to get some control over it or you'll have a rough time, boy." Naruto found himself shivering at the atmosphere created by the man's words. Despite his ridiculous appearance, a mummy dressed in a black suit, Osiris' words carried enough weight and wisdom that Naruto couldn't help but listen. And, because he listened, he found himself absolutely mortified at his future. "By the way, make and deliver this order by the end of next week and you'll be rewarded greatly. My wife is a dessert addict." Osiris slid a piece of papyrus across the counter. Naruto picked it up and briefly noted that the address listed was in Egypt before looking up and noting that the two gods were nowhere in sight. "First thing tomorrow, I'm adding the seals. That's a lot of progress for 12 hours. As much as he hated it, Naruto found himself agreeing with his partner as he looked at his statue. The idea of a monument to praise him was still a very odd and foreign thing to him. I guess the Hokage monument would have been the same thing. He mused to himself. The monument would have been bigger too. Though, the Hokage monument wouldn't have had a detailed rendition of his full body. A lot of progress on his head had been made while he was working. He could now spot his trademark whiskers. There was no denying now that this statue had been made for him. Still want to destroy it? Maybe. The blonde thought back as his feet carried him away. The statue represented everything he didn't want to happen. Destroying would, at this point, be somewhat symbolic for him. But you won't. Yup. The blonde sighed out while internally cursing his stupid bleeding heart. It would not allow him to trample over the hard work of people who just wanted to show their appreciation to him. No matter how annoying it was. You have no one to blame but yourself, you know that? Yup. Both the beast and his container chuckled at this. Despite how inconvenienced he may have acted, the blonde knew that at the heart of the situation, his misfortune was so ridiculous that it could be considered funny. "I'm glad that you seem to be in a joyful mood tonight." Naruto was sucked out of his inner conversation by the sound of Artemis' voice. A quick look around showed that he had somehow managed to walk his way to the town's local park. "I had a weird day," Naruto said while focusing his attention onto the goddess. "Be prepared for many more after this." Naruto shook his head at her words. "I never said I would join." It was Artemis' turn to shake her head. "Let's just say I have a feeling." The woman's smirk, for some odd reason, gave the blonde a very bad feeling. "Are you ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be." Artemis nodded her head before clapping her hands. A moment later, a bright light flashed through the clearing, forcing Naruto to close his eyes. "Candy God." A loud, booming voice made Naruto power through the light and open his eyes. The blonde nearly summoned the sage's chakra instantly at the sight that greeted him. Giants, massive people who stood nearly 4 times his height, stood before him. Both men and women, adorned in a variety of clothes including everything from fine robes to full-out battle armor. Their presence made them glow and Naruto knew instantly that he was standing in the presence of gods. "Candy-sama." The same voice spoke out once more. Naruto managed to quickly match the voice to a bearded giant who was wielding a golden trident. "We are pleased to finally meet you." The giant spoke before doing something that nearly shocked the blonde out of his skin. He bowed. A full down on one knee and bent head bow. Slowly, the people behind him followed his actions. Even Artemis bowed, leaving Naruto as the only standing person within the park. "We welcome your leadership." The group spoke out as one. Their voice combined in a harmonious shout that filled the area and carried for miles. What? That's it for part 9. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.